Okay, people, it's time to end the madness and clear this up once and for all. Apostrophes are actually important, and not only do we tend to struggle with it in our writing, but most of our country is pretty terrible at it. So today we're going to talk about how apostrophes correctly show contractions and/or possession. For example, contractions are when we take a compound word or two words and condense them down to an even shorter version, and we show that apostrophe to show what's been cut. So cannot becomes can't. Should not becomes shouldn't. Would have becomes would've, etc. Now, a lot of people find this to be difficult because we confuse different versions of its and there, which we'll talk more about a little bit later. But my biggest memory tip here is to remember that in contractions, apostrophes are kind of like surgical scars. When you see that little cut there, it's a sign that something used to be here and no longer is. I have taken out the N-O in not here. I have taken out the O in not here and the H-A here. So those contracted apostrophes are showing where letters used to be. Apostrophes can also show possession, like a dog's tail. If there's one dog has its one tail, it's showing possession. Or the men's room. It's the one room that all the men around can go to. Or the soprano's aria. If she's singing a very specific kind of opera song, and she's the only one who gets to sing it, she gets to own it. But where a lot of people mess up is, what do we do if the word ends in S? And believe it or not, it depends. If the word is one single person or one single item that ends in S, then you still will add the apostrophe S at the end anyway. So if James Potter has a flying car, which he didn't, we're going to say James's car with that extra apostrophe S. But if a group of people, like a family, or maybe even a plural noun that's not people, ends in S, then you only add the apostrophe and you don't add a second S. So if I want to talk about the Jones family, then the Joneses' car only has the apostrophe and not a second S. Or if multiple cats in a house all share one water bowl, then I'll have my plural cats showing possession with the apostrophe, and then I'll stop. Now, there's a serious grammar felony that's happening in our culture today. Contractions like should have or would have somehow morphed into should of, which is not a thing. This should never have started and needs to end now. Don't say it, don't write it, don't type it, don't do it. What happened was, we originally said should have, like I should have gone to the store. We contracted it down to should have, but the problem is people heard should have and wrote should of down. They wrote what they heard. And so now a whole generation is writing should of when it makes no sense at all. Same thing goes with shoulda or coulda. Like shoulda, coulda, woulda is an expression. Don't do it. Unless you're making a joke. Because you will be judged. No offense. A few other tricky situations tend to come up with homophones and plurals. So think about there, and there, your, and then it's and its. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest tip that I have for you is to remember that the apostrophe in a contraction is acting like a scar showing what used to be there. If you can remember that, you should know that this form of there, T-H-E-Y apostrophe R-E, stands for they are. And don't try to put one of the other versions of there when you're trying to express a subject and a verb. Same thing goes for your and its. These versions without the apostrophe technically show possession. And I know that's weird for us because we want to put apostrophes on possessive stuff. But the word its is already possessive. Some other situations come up when we look at men's or women's or children's, like in a department store. I've seen a lot of signs, incredible companies and stores misuse apostrophes, which is not cool. I've seen signs for the men's department without the apostrophe, which is terrifying because men is already plural. Why would you add just an S? I have no idea. I've seen issues come up with the word years, depending if you're trying to be plural, showing multiple years owning something, or a single year owning something. And trivia for you, Mother's Day and Father's Day are supposed to be possessive because it's a day when you honor your specific mother. It's her day. But Veterans Day and Grandparents' Day and certain other kinds of days actually don't get apostrophes. And I looked it up, and it's because the government wanted the American people to honor veterans, but this day is not just for veterans. So they didn't want there to be possession here, so they didn't put an apostrophe. Now, if you watch this video and you're still struggling with when do I put an apostrophe or not, or an S or not, here's my favorite way to think about it. Anytime I'm looking at a word, I always check if it's plural first and if it's possessive second. And I always go in that order. Because you have to think about things like, is the word already plural? Like the word children is already plural. Mice is already plural. And hour is already plural. Or do I need to add an S to it? If I want multiple dogs and not just one, I'll change it from dog to dogs. And once I figure out the plural status, then I will decide if it gets an apostrophe or not. Because if I only want it to be plural, I'm just going to stop. Don't put an apostrophe on something that's just plural and not possessive. Don't do it. If I want to talk about a children's choir, then I'll take that already plural word and just add an apostrophe S. But if I take a word that I have caused to be plural and want it to be possessive, again, I just got to pay attention. I got to think about, is this one dog or several dogs? One pencil or several pencils? One boy or several boys? So at the end of the day, this just requires some attention to detail and trying to figure out how many and who's owning what. So let's practice. Look at these 8 sentences and the words that I have underlined and bolded. See if you can figure out which ones are already fine and are already correct and which ones need to be edited because they don't show a use of an apostrophe correct. Let's look at the answers. In number 1, I'm trying to say it is going to be a great day, so I'm going to add in that apostrophe to show that I have contracted out the I in is. Same thing for number 2. In the original sentence, I misused the version of your that I wanted. Women's shoes department is just fine. It's for all women, and it's being possessive. Which department? The women's one. The original sentence in number 4 misused their. Make sure if it's possessive, use THEIR. In number 5, I needed to take out the word of and say have, because should of is not a thing. For number 6, if I want to talk about Britney Spears' world tour, this is one person whose name happens to end in an S, and since it's only one person, I'm adding the apostrophe S anyway, as opposed to a family name like Jones. And then finally, the aliens poisoned the world's water supply. If I'm just talking about Earth and one world, then I'm not going to add an extra S here. I'm just going to go one world apostrophe S. The water supply that is ours. And finally, number 8 was fine. The soldier destroyed the zombies' hideout. If there's lots of them, and they're all owning one hideout, then it's possessive that way. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.